I want to say what a privilege it is to be back in Israel. I've met many of you over the course of several years. Most of you know that my experience in coming here started back in 1973 when I was all of 17 years old and made my first trip to Israel. Since that time, I have come numerous times, sometimes 4 or 5 times a year. I've brought thousands of people, many who come to Israel for the first time to see this remarkable country. I have noted through the years just the dramatic changes that have taken place in its economy, and the growth, the development, going from, I often have called it a sleepy little economy where they were selling oranges and living off the kibbutzim, to an incredible high-tech economy where they're leading the world in many innovative and entrepreneurial activities. And it's been something to behold to see this remarkable nation and its growth and development. And I've often said that there are so many parallels between Israel and the United States, and that both countries share not just an organizational relationship, but an organic one, in that both were created as people sought refuge from tyranny. They sought religious freedom. They sought an opportunity to raise their families with the values that they hold dear, and wanted to live in peace, security, but also in an understanding of personal responsibility and opportunity. And in Israel, we've certainly seen that. And in many ways, Israel over the past 43 years that I've been visiting reminds me of reading about the early days of the American pioneers and their willingness to take on every kind of challenge, to innovate, to create, and to build an extraordinary life and economy for people. In both cases, there was an underpinning. It's not something we talk about very often because it's politically incorrect, but it would be almost impossible for me to note the parallel without making mention of the fact that in both cases, there is a strong undergirding of faith that is the reason and the foundation for these two nations. And I know it's probably more popular, more comfortable for many people to speak of it clearly in the secular terms, but there's no explanation for America other than there were people of faith who believed that it was not only about doing something for themselves, but it was about the generosity of their spirits and sharing, giving, building a society for their entire community and not just for themselves. Israel shares that, and it is the faith element, the faith foundation, that really gives Israel a very unique perspective and a sense of duty, responsibility, and honor. We see it even in the way that war is waged. I was here in 2014 during the attacks that Hamas made on Israel. It was very striking to note the difference between the way the maybe international press was reporting it, almost with a sense of equivalency. Both sides need to calm down. But when you were actually here, you saw that Hamas was firing rockets into civilian targets intentionally and on purpose. The Israelis were going to extraordinary length to avoid civilian casualties, even with the amazing knock on the roof strategy that they employed. And I was at the southernmost air base near Gaza, met with pilots, saw the video of how they would go to extraordinary lengths to prevent any civilian casualties. And frankly, it was at a level that I've not seen anywhere, including the United States, to avoid collateral damage. Anyway, all of that is to say, we're in a remarkable time right now. We've just gone through a very brutal presidential election. I happen to know because I still have a lot of the bruises on me that haven't completely healed. I was one of those 17 people that Donald Trump annihilated in the Republican primary. But after I dropped out, I supported Donald Trump, continued to believe throughout the entire process that he was going to win. Found myself one of the few people, even at the network that I had worked for and went back to after my candidacy ended, Fox News, found myself even there as one of the few people who believed that Donald Trump was going to win the election. And even at the lowest point of the process leading up to November's election, I continued to hold fast that he was going to win. And I was right. It's good to be right. Wish I'd been right about a lot of other things, but on that I was right. I think his presidency is going to be marked by a very, very different kind of approach to governing, because he does not come with a typical resume. The election was disruptive. I think his presidency will be disruptive, and quite frankly, I think the United States needs a disruptive process to, as he often said in the campaign trail, drain the swamp. To relate it to this morning, before I take your questions, I think we're going to enter a very new and dramatically different and dramatically more positive relationship between the United States and Israel. That's evidenced not only by Donald Trump's own personal view, the fact that his son-in-law and daughter are Jewish, the appointment of David Friedman to be the U.S. ambassador to Israel. All of these are clear indications that there's going to be a very different relationship between Israel and the United States than we have seen. And as one who loves my country and loves Israel, I'm delighted to know there's going to be a difference, because there needs to be. The recent actions by the United States at the United Nations, I felt, were embarrassing, shameful. The United Nations has become a farce, not a force. The fact that over the past year, in 2016, the United Nations had 20 resolutions against Israel. They had one against North Korea, one against Russia, one against Syria, and one against Iran. I don't think even the harshest critic of Israel could possibly, with a straight face, say, yes, Israel deserves 20 times the negative attention of the United Nations than Russia, Iran, Syria, and North Korea. That's absurd. And the fact that the United States did not veto the very targeted and harmful action toward Israel was embarrassing. And I think we're going to see a very dramatic change in U.S. policy as it relates to Israel. And yesterday we were at the Knesset. One of the members of the Knesset said, well, we're only, I think he's mentioned 16 days away from the time. And so when I spoke, I said, could you tell me once again how many days it is? And he said, and I said, I knew what it was. I just wanted to hear it one more time. With that, I'd love to take any of your questions, and I'll do my best either to answer them or deflect them or ignore them.
You shouldn't say who they are when they...
Oh, okay, yes. If you would just indicate who you are and what media entity, that would be helpful. Thank you. That'll determine how I answer the question, probably. Well, thank you very much. It's been good. Yes, sir.
Steve Leibowitz from ILTV. There was about a 15-minute news cycle in which there were reports that the next ambassador from the United States to Israel was going to be Mike Huckabee. Can you comment on whether it was even considered or whether you were approached?
It was interesting because I'd been in the Trump Tower that very day to talk to the president-elect about a cabinet post that he offered me and I turned down. The ambassadorship to Israel never was discussed. It was never mentioned. It was never offered. I got stories. In fact, I was getting emails and text messages not only from all over America, but from all over Israel. Congratulations, we're so excited. For what? And I don't know who first ran with the story. I think it came, frankly, out of Israel. But it was reported not as speculation is or rumors have it. It was reported as if it was a done deal. And the fact is, it had never, ever been broached in the conversations that I had with the president-elect. I have no idea where it came from. It didn't come from Trump. It didn't come from me. and whoever made it up, made it up. I've been the subject, however, of worse rumors. Let me go ahead and say that. So if that's the worst thing that is rumored about me, I'm okay with that. Yes?
Jordana Miller from ABC News. Are you going to be meeting with the Prime Minister during this trip?
Already did, yesterday. Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about that meeting?
It was a wonderful meeting, but as far as the content, obviously, that would be inappropriate for me to disclose that.
Nothing? No color?
45 minutes.
You know, I mean, we've been friends a long time. Let me be very clear. I've known the Prime Minister before he was the Prime Minister and before he was in an active role in government. He is a personal friend. He's also a person for whom I have the greatest admiration. And I told him that he's still immensely popular, as he is in the U.S., extraordinarily popular, greatly respected. And, you know, we talked about a variety of things, some personal, some related to the world stage, but it would be inappropriate for me to have, you know, any disclosure of that. It probably would mean I wouldn't have any more meetings with him. Yes?
Owen Alterman from the I-24 News Satellite Channel. A bit of a big picture question. Should the United States be more involved in the Middle East or less involved in the Middle East? It's a question that's hovered over American foreign policy debate over the last year.
If more involved means that we are attentive and that we are supportive of those who are pressing for greater levels of freedom, democracy, personal responsibility, and national responsibility, yes, we should be. If it means that we meddle into the internal affairs of any nation, whether it's Israel or someone else, no. I mean, it's not our job to tell a sovereign nation what it should or shouldn't do. We certainly can express as a nation, and again, I'm speaking now, the State Department and the administration is not only free, but I think they have a responsibility to speak out about policies that they would support or some that they might not. But ultimately, the decision, whether it's Israel or Egypt or Jordan or whoever it may be in the Middle East, I think has every right to make decisions that are in the best interest of their sovereign nation. Now, if that sovereign nation makes decisions that are potentially harmful to the United States, then I think we have every right to intervene. And Iran comes to mind. I think that the dealings that our current and soon-to-be former administration has done with Iran are unbelievably dangerous and make no sense from the perspective of aiding and abetting the largest sponsor of terrorism in the world. It is beyond my comprehension as to why we ever thought we would trust the Iranian government. Yes, sir.
Huckabee here, Israeli television channel 1. Do you believe, the governor, that Russia disrupted the free elections in the United States?
You know, there's been all these allegations that Russia intervened in the election, but nobody's been able to say in what way did they intervene that had any impact whatsoever. Even the New York Times has questioned the veracity of the Russians being the source of the WikiLeaks exposure. Julian Assange was on Fox News last night with Sean Hannity for a full hour, vehemently denied that the Russians had anything to do with their acquisition of the information that they released. Interestingly, no one in the Clinton campaign, no one at the DNC ever denied that what was released was true. They just said it was unfortunate and that it was embarrassing, not that it was false. There's no evidence, not even a scintilla of evidence, that the Russians got involved in hacking election machines, affected the single vote of an individual American in any state. And I think it's a narrative that has been played out as saying the Russians got involved and hacked the election. Well, to most people, when they hear that, they think, oh, the Russians affected the outcome. No one has been able to provide any evidence whatsoever that the outcome of the election was changed, altered, even affected by anything the Russians did.
How do you explain, Governor, the close relationship between Mr. Trump and President Putin?
To my knowledge, they've never met. I mean, I always hear about how close they are. They've never met. They've never had a meeting. They've never met each other. They've talked on the phone, I think, since the election, but they've never had a meeting. There is no relationship other than the courtesy of a phone call following the election.
I mean, Mr. Trump, you know, he made very many compliments to Mr. Putin. I mean, he says that he's a wise leader, so on and so forth. It's very strange.
I think if you knew Donald Trump like I did, you'd realize how shrewd and how very strategic Donald Trump is in his public as well as his private comments. Donald Trump, I don't think for a moment has any illusions that Vladimir Putin is America's best friend or that he's somebody that we're going to create some amazing alliance with. But he also does recognize something I think this administration we currently have hasn't, is that the Russians are as adamant about stopping ISIS and radical forms of Islamic terrorism as we are. They've experienced it in their own country. They know the effect of it. It doesn't mean that we're partners, but it means that there are some issues and areas that there could perhaps be collaboration. But I think this notion that Donald Trump is somehow a big pal of Vladimir Putin, that he is going to go fishing with him and maybe ride horses without shirts. Don't see that happening for a host of reasons with Donald Trump. I'm pretty sure that ain't gonna happen. Yes.
Tara Beck from United with Israel. There's been, people have been talking about how they've been going to vote in the elections and they never had to show ID. And apparently California was where the popular vote went to Clinton. Do people suspect that the popular vote would have been much higher towards Trump if it weren't for these types of issues?
I think people speculate that that would be the case, but most people don't think that much about it simply because he still won. It really does show the genius of the American Electoral College, which is under an enormous amount of criticism right now because people say, well, he didn't win the popular vote. Well, everyone knew what the rules were going in, including Hillary Clinton, and had she won the Electoral College and not the popular vote, Hillary would have never said a word about, gee, it's unfair, I shouldn't even take the office. I didn't win the popular vote. I mean, that's nonsense, and I've known the Clintons for 40-something years, and I'm pretty sure that it would never have been a point at which she would have questioned the wisdom of the Electoral College. The Electoral College, as I say, is a part of the genius of the American system in that what it does, it distributes power throughout the country and doesn't let 3 or 4 states completely decide the future of the nation and who its leaders are. If we had a purely popular vote, essentially candidates would only go to New York, California, Pennsylvania, Florida, and Texas. That's it. They would go to those few states. They would campaign there. They would try to win there. And most of the states would never see a presidential candidate.
Well, what I meant was that even in the states where she had the highest vote, couldn't have been, many of them were not even legal votes.
It's very possible. Yeah, we don't know. And it's one of the reasons I think many of us believe that it is not inappropriate to ask for a photo ID. It's not because we want to suppress a vote, it's because we want to ensure the veracity of the votes, that every vote is a legitimate vote. I always try to remind people, if I go to vote and I'm a U.S. citizen and qualified to vote, somebody else goes and they're not a U.S. citizen, they're not qualified to vote, their vote essentially, their illegal vote erases my legal vote. We all should want to make sure that doesn't happen. Yes?
What is your response to reports that Trump may move the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem? And do you believe that this will, are you concerned at all that it might create violence on the ground here or any negative reactions from Arab allies of the United States?
Well, by law, we should have moved the embassy back in 1995 when it was first made law, and every president has said, yes, I'm going to do it, and then never has. I think Trump will actually do it, and I hope he does. I'm encouraging him to. This is the capital of Israel. Jerusalem has always been the capital for the Jewish people. It's never been the capital for anybody other than for the Jewish people. It's never been a capital for any other people ever. And I think, for people to act like this is somehow an outrageous move, I don't understand why. It would be like saying, we can't have the embassy in Washington, D.C. Might make somebody mad. Well, you know what? They may need to get over it. This is the capital of Israel. This is where the seat of government is held. And for the United States to be held hostage by, the potential dislike, I said it yesterday. For people who say, well, if this happens, there will be people who will be angry and they will hate Israel more. Look, the enemies of Israel can't hate Israel any more than they already hate Israel. I mean, it just seems a little ridiculous for us to talk about, if we concede all these points, whether it's giving up real estate or pressuring America not to move their own embassy to the seat of government in Israel, everybody will be nice and polite. And, we'll all play with Play-Doh, enjoy puppies, and ride ponies. I'm sorry, but that ain't going to happen. There are people who hate Israel. They're going to hate Israel no matter what Israel does, and some of them hate America no matter what America does. I think countries need to act according to what they think is right and what they think is the appropriate response to where the government is. So I hope it does move.
And you don't think this will risk any relationships between the modern Arab states and the United States if they threaten to pull their ambassadors out of Washington?
If somehow they don't recognize the legitimate capital of Israel as being, I'll use the Hebrew term, Yerushalayim, and they pull their ambassadors, who does that really hurt? Is the United States going to be damaged because the ambassador of Venezuela goes home? I seriously doubt it. May hurt Venezuela, won't hurt us. Now, ultimately people have to decide, whether they think that there's going to be repercussions. There probably will be in some places. But we can't act like we're always cowering in the face of some unnamed or even a named threat. That's the mark of a weak nation, not the mark of a strong nation. And I think the United States should put its embassy where it wants to put its embassy, and the appropriate place by law in the U.S. since 1995 is Yerushalayim.
And where does that leave the Palestinians in their aspirations for a capital in East Jerusalem?
The Palestinians first need to acknowledge Israel's right to exist. They need to quit naming streets after terrorists. They need to quit paying salaries to people who kill Jews. I'm not a Jew, but look, this is something to me that is pretty obvious. And people, again, want to make moral equivalency. Well, the Palestinians, and then on the other hand, you have the Israelis. But, the Israelis, I don't know of a single street in Israel that is named after someone who, in cold blood, murdered a Palestinian. I just don't. I'm not aware of that. I'm not aware the Israeli government pays people to kill Palestinians. Not aware of that. I don't think any of you are either. So for me, it's a matter of if there is a serious attempt to have a more peaceful relationship, it would start with a denunciation of terror, a denunciation of murder, a denunciation of Hamas, and for example, if the Palestinians put a map together, put Israel on the map. Right now, it's not on their maps. Yes.
Hi, Emily Young, freelance right now. I have two questions. The first is, you spoke briefly about the disappointment in the UN with the U.S.
Yes.
Abstain. And I was wondering, looking back on the Obama administration, would you call his administration a pro-Israel one? And then my second question, which has no connection, is what do you think of the Paris peace talks that are supposed to be happening soon?
If I understood the question, do I think that the Obama administration has been pro-Israel? No. In a single word, no. I think it's been hostile. Unnecessarily and irrationally hostile. I could point to the Iranian nuclear deal, which was take Israel out of the equation. That was a very foolish decision and a dangerous one. I think it has the most dangerous implications, not just for Israel, but for all of the world that we've ever seen. the two countries with whom Obama has a better relationship now than he did when he took office are Iran and Cuba. Now, what does that say? He's embraced two nations who have murdered dissidents, who kill people in the streets for taking a point of view that's different. One that has been a willing satellite proxy of the Soviet Union in its day, and Russia more recently, that has squashed any attempt of journalistic activity that would report things. And I think all of you as journalists should be appalled that both the Iranians and the Cubans were embraced by the Obama administration. Because in both of these countries, their attitude toward journalists has been not just dismal, it's been deplorable, and in some cases deadly. This should be an alarm that goes off to every person who reports news, because if you were doing it in Iran and you reported something that was unfavorable to the government, we might never hear from you again. You wouldn't just make the front page of the paper, except in maybe the obituary column. And the same goes true for Cuba. So, and I think the other question was about the Paris peace talks. Is that correct?
Yeah.
I don't have a whole lot of hope that talks under the current atmosphere of the world stage are going to be productive, but I'm certainly glad they're having them, and I hope they're productive. But I've not seen a whole lot in the international community that said that there's an objectivity when it comes to such things. And I go back to the point of saying 20 UN resolutions against Israel in 2016, and only one against nations that are either by their very own nature or description totalitarian dictatorships that have oppressed people, murdered people, that have imprisoned journalists. I mean, it's just, how do you get your arms around that? I don't think you can.